Okay, so you think I'm a hypocrite? Well, I let's talk a little bit about this YouTube channel because some of the comments are quite aggressive and I've got quite thick skin and you definitely need that to be putting yourself out there on the internet to people you don't know. And some of the comments in the past when there've been personal attacks on me or my family or my lifestyle or whatever, most of the time I just ignore them and forget about them. Some of them they've been so just incredibly unsavory that I've removed them or blocked them so I don't view them at all. Over the weekend, there were quite a few negative comments, and over the last week, I've had a kind of an increased amount of negative comments, and I guess that means that the channel is reaching a wider audience. Now, why am I sharing all of this information? It's not to put myself on a pedestal and say, I've cracked it and, we're carbon neutral or negative and we're doing a great job and doing our bit. It's not about that at all. I actually started putting the videos up because there was no one out there that was showing a real world personal experience of an air to water heat pump working for them in their home. And the media and everything you found online was just horror story after horror story after horror story. So I felt that I could try and establish a bit of a platform to share that this technology does work, it is comfortable, and to try and counteract some of that misinformation. Now, I want to just tackle a couple of comments and then kind of show a little bit more of the kind of holistic view of what we're doing and where we're going. So, Jonathan Wright 96, I apologize for picking on you in particular, but you were one of the people who kind of called me out and shared some negativity on the channel. So we're just going to use this for an example and to try and highlight a few points. So Jonathan Wright 96 says, how can a 3-child family driving a most likely diesel SUV possibly consider themselves carbon neutral? You'd have to factor every aspect of the carbon footprint associated in replacing these technologies when they fail, along with the inevitable food production, transport, clothes, shoes, diapers, water treatment, travel, etc., associated CO2. So, in that particular video, I never said that we were carbon neutral. So let's start with that. So we're not considering ourselves there. That's, as I clearly stated in the video, that's our aim. That's our goal. That's where we're going. Where have we been? We've been in a much darker place. I grew up in a household where my dad always had a 5 litre V8 muscle car or bigger, big V12s. And I grew up in that world of no replacement for displacement, bigger is better. And I've had to try and unlearn that in some ways. A few years ago, even when I had my first child, on the driveway, I had a 4.7 litre V8 Jeep. I had a 5.5 litre supercharged AMG V8. I had my daily driver was a Mercedes S-Class, the biggest, most ridiculous car they make, big luxury thing. And my wife, okay, she had a little Citroen C1. She liked that little 1 litre 3-cylinder thing. Probably not the worst thing for the environment. I also had a much older, more polluting motorbike back then. And I wasn't doing any of my walk into the shops or riding my push bike or anything. So that kind of shows that we are making a big transition and a big effort to moving forward. Now, you mentioned that we're a 3-child family, so of course there's going to be more carbon emissions for us having 3 children. So should we stop having children? Everyone should stop having children because of a climate emergency. Well, that's for each person to decide, but I don't think a judgmental tone is going to help anyone, and some of these comments can be quite alienating for people. So sorry to pick up on you, particularly Jonathan Wright, but there are things that we can do to mitigate it. Whatever situation we are currently in or we were in the past, we can all improve and we can all take steps forward. In terms of driving a diesel SUV, no, we don't have an SUV anymore. The car that we are in is now our only car. So we've gone down from always having 3 or 4 cars on the drive, even though it was just 2 of us. I do work in the motor trade. Now we just have one family car, and it is a Euro 5. So it's not the newest. It's a car we've had for 5 years. We like to get a good life cycle out of a car, like main family car, at least these days. I mean, in times gone by, I was happy to chop and change every year and didn't really consider, embodied carbon in decision making. And it's a 2-litre diesel. So yeah, I know diesel is now public enemy number 1. But as we were doing our calculations, we would have loved to get an electric car 5 or so years ago when we were beginning our journey. But unfortunately, that just wasn't financially viable for us. There's many reasons for that, in terms of ethical reasoning and in terms of making decisions, and principally based, I am very against finance in principle. So leasing a car or a vehicle or anything is ruled out entirely. I'll only take finance for buying a home, and that's one of my principles. I don't expect everyone to agree with that or understand that, but we can't always make every decision with no regard to costs, especially when we're living in this time of, cost of living crisis or whatever. I consider ourselves quite fortunate to be able to have made some of the difficult decisions we've made over the last few years. We had to move house. Our last house was a tiny little 2-bed ex-council end of terrace house, and when we moved into that house we had no children, and then over the years we'd grown our family into 3 children, and we were kind of bursting at the seams. So the money that could have potentially been spent on an electric vehicle and staying in a smaller home, we had to move into a home, especially as now I've just about got my oldest boy is now grown into a teenager. We need a bit more space, unfortunately, and everything that comes with that. So that's kind of the cost side of things. One of the huge parts that I haven't really talked about in reducing our carbon emissions is I used to drive 40 to 60,000 miles per year. A lot of that for work, when I was dating my wife and she was studying in Wales and things like that. I now don't drive very much at all. You'll see, if you saw, I recently sold my motorbike. That was a relatively new one with low emissions, but it was a large capacity engine. I'm looking to downsize and kind of reduce my carbon footprint there. But I'd only average 750 miles per year on my motorbike. And I think when I worked out the carbon emissions of that, based on the figures that are on the logbook of the grams per kilometre of CO2, the grams of CO2 per kilometre, that would only work out about 100 kilograms of CO2 per year. So yeah, that is an emission, but can we offset that somewhere else? I wish electric motorbikes were anywhere near the technology that we find in electric cars. Then it would be a no-brainer. Anyway, a few years ago, if I'd done the calculations correct using the carbonfootprint.com calculator, my old Mercedes E-Class, over 40 to 60,000 miles per year, I would have been emitting around 20 tons of CO2 doing all of that driving. Nowadays, we occasionally have to use the car for travel. I mean, if the rail network was better, like when I lived in Germany, I'd be much more keen to use that and to rely on that. But also with 3 kids, sometimes it just becomes almost impossible. We don't live anywhere near a train station, unfortunately. But most of the time, for everything, my kids are now in the habit that we walk and we cycle as much as we possibly can. And even if that is miles and miles and miles, the most my kids have done when my middle child, he was 5, maybe turning 6. This was in 2020, and as we're heading out of the lockdown and the restrictions were easing, we did 50 miles in one day. He was on his own pedal bike, no assistance. So my kids now, over the last few years, it really started in about 2016. So this is kind of a 8-year process of us reducing our carbon footprint and making steps towards becoming carbon neutral. I'm not saying we're there. I'm not saying we're perfect, but we are just trying to take steps in the right direction. in another one of your comments, Jonathan Wright, you mentioned that a 24-year-old boiler starting from an efficiency of 60% would be way down to around 30 to 40% efficiency. That's just completely false. I don't know where you've got that information from. If you've got a source or you've got some data that you can share to back that up, I'd love to see it. But boilers don't lose that much efficiency. Heat exchangers can clog up, and the combustion cycle and the way it's burning, it can affect the efficiency a little bit. But worst case, you're talking probably losing 10% efficiency on a really worst case situation. So your comment there was saying that I could have saved 1.7 tons by going to a combi boiler, and I would have been better off than fitting a heat pump. And then now I start to see that maybe you're making some justification here. So I apologize if this feels like I'm picking on you, but it says you've fitted 2 stoves and a biomass pellet stove 20 years ago. It's still going strong. Not used any gas for the last 2 years after Putin's antics. Spend around 450 on briquettes and pellets per year, and you zone your use to haul pellet stove in the morning and large afternoon to evening 24 December. Okay, where it's needed, where you're located. So you've got serious doubts about the number of skilled heat pump engineers available for any repairs, and you can see a lot of these failing before 10-year time frame due to relatively simple issues. So you've clearly got a bit of a beef, or you're skeptical, which is fine. I was a little bit skeptical going into this, but unfortunately a lot of this isn't based in any reality. Maybe if you read a lot of the FUD, the fear, uncertainty and doubt, then maybe that's where you're coming from. But you've also said for a combi boiler replacement would have been a 10th to a 20th of the equipment price of heat pump. Just wasn't the case. I mean, if you're not considering the government grant or anything else, then maybe. But for us, it was cheaper to install the heat pump in terms of capital cost. It's cheaper to run. And if we compare a brand new 90% efficient boiler to our heat pump, we are on track to save 2.5 tons or more in 1 year. And that's compared to the new boiler. That's not comparing it to our old inefficient 60% non-condensing boiler. We're saving an extra several tons over that on top. So sorry for another rant this week. I think we all need to we need to create an environment where we can have open dialogue and we can discuss these things, and we can rely on facts and figures rather than 1 or 2 anecdotes. And I appreciate that my experience I'm sharing with you guys, a lot of it is anecdotal, and the last video was very much, there was quite a few anecdotes of how we're experiencing the heat pump. In some ways that's good, and for some people that can be really disarming to hear a personal experience that people can relate, and with no vested interest. I don't work in the industry, I don't get any commission or kickback or anything, but I like to share quite a lot of data on the channel, and I'm always welcome it. I've shared my spreadsheet and my findings and all of my information for people to really drill into and to critique, and a lot of you have given me a lot of feedback on that, which I welcome. I thank you. The main point of this video is, am I a hypocrite for sharing steps that I'm taking, even though I haven't completed my journey and I've still got things to do? Today I did my usual about 3 miles ish, a bit more than 3 miles every morning. I do to ride to school with my kids and then ride home, do a bit of work from home, and then I'll be back on my bike, and I've got to do another, it's about 5 miles each way to ride into work and back. No matter what we try and do with home heating, I mean, that can be a low-hanging fruit because it can be a kind of passive thing that we don't have to really make any lifestyle change for. The biggest thing that we have done as a family is reducing our travel in a car, changing our lifestyle to suit a lot more walking and cycling. And as I say, I was, without factoring in any kind of major family travel or anything, mostly just commuting for work and social and stuff, I was emitting more than 20 tons per year just in my car travel alone. And we can dive into other things. My wife has been a vegetarian since she's 10 years old, and for many reasons she just doesn't like the taste and texture of meat, and that has a knock-on effect. Although I'm not a vegetarian, we consume very little meat in the household. I'm a bit of an old school, like make and men do. uh, no, mend and make do. I'm getting that completely wrong. And I don't like throwing away things, and I hate waste, and I hate food waste. And we're trying to take all of these little steps as well, but we're just trying to acknowledge what the low-hanging fruit is. And if we can solve the big ones for most people, transport and home energy consumption, if we can master those two, then we will go a long way to doing a little bit and making progress. If we don't even attempt, and we think that we're not even going to make a difference and we can't make a change, and we just give up because of what China's doing and everything else, that's just such a defeatist attitude. I just don't accept that argument at all. All right, rant is way too long. I'm going to say bye for now. Thanks for listening, and leave some positive comments. Anything nice you have to say, anything you've learned from the channel. And if you want to push back a little bit, fine. Do it kindly. Even for thick-skinned people like me, occasionally 1 or 2 comments just gets under my skin just a tiny bit. It just makes me want to respond, and I try and brush it off and try and be kind anyway, because we're all on a different journey in trying to improve what we're doing anyway. Take care, everyone.